you're wrongfully fired
Yeah.
from your job, and you fight for years to get justice and finally win. But then the battle over how much compensation you're owed, it just drags on and on. Is it fair to be denied potential raises and benefits you would have earned if you hadn't been unfairly dismissed? That's the question at the heart of this deep dive into a Philippine Supreme Court case.
It's a really interesting question. What's so fascinating about this case is how it really digs into, that idea of making someone whole after being wronged. It's not just about back pay, but considering the potential future you lost.
Yeah, exactly. This case, Dumapis versus Lepanto Consolidated Mining Company, it's from 2020, went all the way to the Supreme Court. It started with accusations of high grading against a group of workers. Now, can you explain what high grading means for our listeners who may not be familiar with mining terminology?
Of course, high grading in the mining world basically refers to the theft of high-value ore, which is a serious offense because it can lead to significant financial losses for the company.
So 12 workers at Lepanto were accused of this,
Yeah.
which led to an investigation and their dismissal. They claimed they were illegally fired and fought back.
Right. The initial judge they had, this is called the labor arbiter in the Philippines, dismissed their claims, but the case didn't end there. The workers appealed to the National Labor Relations Commission, or NLRC. It's kind of like a specialized court for labor disputes.
And the NLRC reversed the decision, right? At least for some of the workers.
Yes. For 3 of them, Moreno Dumapis, Francisco Liagao, and Elmo Tundagui, the NLRC found that these 3 were illegally dismissed.
So they won their case at that level. But the story doesn't end there, does it? There were more appeals.
Oh, no, not at all. Lepanto, the mining company, appealed to the Court of Appeals. But the Court of Appeals upheld the NLRC's decision, so they sided with the workers, and then Lepanto took the case all the way to the Supreme Court.
A real legal marathon, what happened at the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court issued their decision on September 15, 2020. They mostly affirmed the lower court's rulings, confirming the illegal dismissal of the 3 workers, and they actually imposed double costs on Lepanto, meaning they had to pay twice the usual legal fees. That's how strongly the court felt that they were in the wrong.
Okay, so the workers were vindicated, but the legal battle didn't stop there, did it?
Yeah,
The case wasn't just about whether they were wrongfully dismissed.
you got it. The real heart of the matter became how much compensation they were owed.
This is where it gets really interesting. Because we're not just talking about back pay for the time they were out of work, right?
Right. It became a dispute centered around calculating the back pay and separation pay for those 3 workers, especially after all the years that had passed with all the appeals.
So what were the main points of disagreement in this calculation? It seems simple at first, but I'm guessing there's more to it.
Well, the main disagreement was about the cutoff date for calculating the back pay. Lepanto argued it should be the date of the initial NLRC decision, and the workers argued it should be the date of the Supreme Court's final decision.
Wow, that's a difference of years.
Yeah.
Why does the choice of cutoff date matter so much?
It has a huge impact on the total amount owed. It's not just a technicality. Think of it this way. Imagine your salary is like a snowball rolling downhill. It's getting bigger every year. Choosing the cutoff date is like deciding where you stop that snowball. A later date means a much bigger amount in the end.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So we've got this tug of war over the cutoff date,
Yeah.
which could mean a big difference in compensation. But wait, there's another twist, isn't there? Something about raises and benefits.
Yes. The workers argued that their back pay should include salary increases that were granted under their collective bargaining agreement, or CBA. Even though those raises happened after they were fired, Lepanto was not happy about this argument.
It does seem counterintuitive at first, getting raises even though they weren't working. What was the legal reasoning behind their argument?
Well, essentially it boils down to the idea that they were unjustly denied the opportunity to earn those raises because they were illegally dismissed. Imagine they were climbing a career ladder toward higher pay. The illegal dismissal knocked them off that ladder. They argued that they should still benefit from the climb they would have experienced.
So it's not about asking for extra money. It's about being compensated for the opportunities they lost because their employment was wrongfully terminated.
Exactly. And this issue of post-dismissal raises is a really tricky area of law. Different courts sometimes reach different conclusions, and that's why the Supreme Court's decision in this case is so important, because it clarified this complex issue.
So drumroll, please. What did the Supreme Court decide? Do they side with the workers or the company?
This is where it becomes a landmark decision. The Supreme Court, in their ruling on GR number 214060, they sided with the workers on both counts. They ruled that the cutoff date for back pay calculations is the date of their final decision.
So the workers were entitled to years of additional back pay. That must have been a huge win for them.
Absolutely. But the court didn't stop there. They established a clear rule for future cases. Back pay should include guaranteed salary increases and benefits that the worker would have received if they hadn't been illegally dismissed.
It's not just about making them whole for the past. It's about recognizing the potential future they lost.
Precisely. And the court clarified what types of increases are included, like those from laws, CBA agreements, company policies. Those are in contingent increases, though, like those based on performance or company profits, those are not included.
So there are some limitations. It's about making up for the lost opportunity, not about giving them a windfall.
Exactly. And to add another layer to this, the court also imposed 12% interest per year on the unpaid amount. This further increased the compensation owed to the workers. So it wasn't just a moral victory, it was a significant financial one.
This case sounds like a legal thriller with high stakes and a dramatic ending. But beyond this case, I'm curious about the broader implications. What does this mean for workers and businesses in the Philippines? And for our listeners, even if they don't work in a mine, what can they learn from this case?
Those are all great questions. It's clear that this case has implications that go beyond just these workers and this company. So stay tuned, because we'll unpack all of that in the next part of our deep dive.
So we know the Supreme Court sided with the workers in Dumapis versus Lepanto. But I'm curious about the broader impact. How does a case like this affect labor laws and business practices in the Philippines?
This case really shows how important legal precedent is the Supreme Court ruling. It doesn't just resolve this one dispute. It sets a standard for how similar cases will be handled in the future.
So it's like a roadmap for future decisions about back pay and illegal dismissal cases.
Exactly. And this is really important in a country like the Philippines, where legal precedents carry a lot of weight. So the Dumapis ruling, it gives both employers and employees a clearer understanding of what to expect in these situations.
That makes sense. It makes the legal environment more predictable,
Right.
which is good for everyone.
Absolutely. This case is a reminder for businesses to make sure their employment practices are fair and follow the law. And it empowers workers to assert their rights, knowing that they have legal options if they're treated unfairly.
It encourages both sides to be more careful and think ahead. It's not just about avoiding lawsuits, but creating a more just and equitable workplace.
Exactly. There's another interesting aspect to this case that we haven't talked about yet. The dissenting opinions. Not all of the Supreme Court justices agreed with the majority decision.
Oh, that's interesting. Even at the highest courts, there can be different views on how a case should be decided. What were the dissenting opinions in the Dumapis case?
The dissenting justices argued that the majority decision, while it had good intentions, could have some unintended consequences. They were worried that awarding so much back pay, including those raises after the workers were fired, could be a big burden on businesses, especially smaller ones.
So they were concerned about the financial impact on companies. That's a valid point to consider, even if it wasn't the majority view.
Exactly. Dissenting opinions are really important in the legal system. They challenge the majority opinion and make us consider different perspectives. They remind us that legal decisions can have really complex consequences.
It's like a built-in system of checks and balances, making sure all sides of an issue are looked at. It also shows that the law isn't always black and white. There's room for different interpretations.
Absolutely. And these dissenting opinions can even influence future legal developments. They raise questions and spark debates that can lead to changes in the law down the road.
So even though the workers won this specific case, the dissenting voices keep the conversation going, which can help the legal system evolve and become more nuanced.
Precisely. Now let's think about our listeners for a minute. You might be thinking, what does a case about miners in the Philippines have to do with me?
That's a fair point. It's easy to see this case as something very distant. But are there any takeaways that apply to our listeners no matter where they live or what their job is?
Absolutely. At its core, this case is about the importance of clear contracts and understanding your rights as an employee. Whether you work in a mine, an office, a restaurant, knowing your rights and responsibilities is essential.
It's about having the knowledge and being ready to stand up for yourself if you need to.
Exactly. And more broadly, the Dumapis case reminds us that even though legal battles are sometimes necessary, they can be long and complicated. It highlights the importance of trying to resolve disputes in other ways before going to court.
So things like mediation or negotiation could save everyone a lot of time, money, and stress.
Exactly. And finally, I think this case shows us that justice is a very complex idea. What seems fair to one person might not seem fair to someone else.
It shows the different ways people see fairness and the importance of looking at things from multiple angles, just like the Supreme Court did with the majority and dissenting opinions.
Exactly. And the legal system is always changing. What's considered fair today might be different in the future as society's values and priorities shift.
So it's an ongoing process of discussion, debate, and refinement, just like we saw in the Dumapis case itself.
You got it? And speaking of that journey, are you ready to hear the final chapter?
Absolutely. Let's finish up this deep dive into the Dumapis versus Lepanto case and see what lasting insights we can take away. Okay, so we've really gotten into the details of the Dumapis versus Lepanto Consolidated Mining Company case. We've looked at the legal arguments and even the dissenting opinions. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key things our listeners should take away from this?
I think this case really highlights how a seemingly simple question, like how much back pay is owed, it can become so complicated. It shows how the legal system tries to balance fairness and tries to restore what was lost because of illegal actions.
Yeah, it's a reminder that the legal system isn't just about saying who's guilty or innocent. It's about making things right as best as possible after someone's been wronged.
Exactly. And this case really shows that even if you win your case, the fight to get what you deserve to be compensated fairly can be another whole challenge. So it's really important to understand your rights as an employee, know the laws, and be prepared for what could be a long legal process.
So both workers and businesses need to be informed and take steps to protect themselves.
Right. For businesses, this case shows it's important to have those clear contracts in place. Treat your employees fairly and make sure your practices align with the law. It's not just about avoiding a lawsuit, but about creating a workplace that's fair and where everyone feels valued.
Yeah, it's about building a culture of fairness and transparency, which benefits everyone.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, some of you might be thinking, well, I'm not in the Philippines. I don't work in a mine, so this doesn't apply to me. But I would say think again.
How so? How does this case go beyond those specifics?
The principles here are universal, This case is about basic ideas like fairness and justice and making things right after someone has been harmed. Those apply to all of us, no matter where we live or what we do.
Even if the legal details might be different from one country to another, the big ideas in this case, fairness, justice, compensation, those are relevant to everyone.
Exactly. And remember, this case also shows us how powerful a legal precedent can be. The Dumapis ruling set a new standard in the Philippines for how to calculate back pay in these illegal dismissal cases. It's going to affect so many workers and businesses going forward.
It shows that one court case can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
It goes far beyond the people directly involved.
Precisely. And it reminds us that the law is always evolving, What's considered fair today might not be tomorrow as society changes and values shift.
It's a good reminder to stay informed about these things, engage in these conversations, and maybe even be part of shaping a more just world.
Well said. So if this deep dive into the Dumapis versus Lepanto case has piqued your interest, we really encourage you to keep learning more. We've included some links in our show notes where you can read the full Supreme Court decision and even explore other landmark cases that have shaped labor law in the Philippines.
And if you found this episode insightful, don't forget to share it with others who might be interested in learning about this fascinating case.
We always love hearing from you, our listeners, so leave a comment, send us an email, or find us on social media. Let us know what you think about this case, about the idea of fair compensation, or any other questions you have about law and the legal system.
Yeah, we're all learning and exploring together. So hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss out on our future deep dives into more fascinating topics. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep those conversations going.